Well, welcome back, everybody, to Thrive in Your Body with Homeopathy, where we discuss what homeopathy can do for you, especially if you're suffering from a chronic health condition. So, I am Monica, and today I'm so much looking forward to speaking with our very distinguished guest, Dr. Jamie Oskin from Phoenix, Arizona. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest today and his impressive bio. Dr. Oskin is a highly trained naturopathic physician with expertise in homeopathy and education. Dr. Oskin is an international speaker on the homeopathic treatment of ADHD and autism, and his work has been published in many distinguished journals. Additionally, Dr. Oskin plays an active role in education as a guest lecturer and a former adjunct faculty member in the Homeopathy Department of the Sonoran University of Health Sciences in Tempe, Arizona, which is formerly known as SCNM. So after graduating with high honors from SCNM, Dr. Oskin completed a one-year residency in general family practice and then a second-year specialty residency with a focus on homeopathy at the Southwest Naturopathic Medical Center in Scottsdale, Arizona. Dr. Oskin holds an esteemed diplomat status from the Homeopathic Academy of Naturopathic Physicians, where he's also a board member, I believe, and as well as being a member of the National Center for Homeopathy. Dr. Oskin is in private practice in Phoenix, Arizona, and consults virtually with clients and other physicians from all over the country. So let me bring on Dr. Oskin for our conversation today. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a true honor. I'm very excited to listen to what all the expertise you're going to share with us and our guests and our audience. So, let's jump right into homeopathy. But the first question I love to ask is, how did you find about homeopathy? And so what led you to become to specialize in homeopathy as a naturopathic doctor? And especially, what led you to specialize in children's neurobehavioral disorders?
Great question. So in my teens, I had dealt with some health problems that kind of compounded into my early 20s. And I had a career shift where I basically went back to do pre-med and medical school. And I knew that I wanted the things that had helped me with my health were not more drugs or that kind of thing. They were actually dealing with things like fixing my nutrition, et cetera. And so I found naturopathic medicine, and it really seemed to call to me. And so I went back to did pre-med and applied to naturopathic school. And initially, I would say that homeopathy wasn't the thing I was most interested in. I was interested in Chinese medicine and acupuncture and Chinese herbs, things like that, because I was interested in all the Chinese philosophy. But when I maybe was in my third year of medical school, I was having a particular kind of pain, like a rib pain, but it was really bad. It's called costochondritis, and it was really, really bad. And I wasn't able to exercise properly and everything because it was really a thorn in your side, you may say. And so I went up to one of my homeopathy professor at the end of class, and I said, do you think homeopathy could help with this? And he said, yeah, come in on the student teaching clinic. And he gave me a homeopathic medicine, and it like magically went away like that. And I thought, wow, there's something to this. So I then, continued to pursue homeopathic treatment for some of my own chronic health conditions and saw them get better, and began sitting in on the homeopathic teaching rotations in the naturopathic medical school and the teaching clinic. And at the time I would get like assigned to a rotation, and then I would sit in on extra rotations because once I saw it working in patients, I got really hooked, you may say. I got bit by the bug. And, homeopathy, initially I was skeptical because it sounds really kind of bizarre, like cures like, and using small doses of medicine. It didn't really make sense to me. But once I saw it work really well, then, my mind changed, so to speak. And And then I did residency. So I did a 1-year naturopathic family medicine residency. And then I did a 2nd-year homeopathy specific residency, which is the only current residency in homeopathy in all of North America. And so it was a really, really fortunate thing for me to have a lot of extra training and expertise that only a handful of people in North America have. And I was really grateful for that. And when I was in my early training, you get exposed to lots of different types of people and different pathologies and different things. And I noticed early on that the cases that were the most fun for me, but also the most meaningful, were children. And I still can remember, it was shortly after residency, but I think early in my private practice, at the time I didn't have a full schedule like I do now. And, one of the first families that came to me had this little boy who was 22 months old. And I was just getting started out. And he had 15 rounds of antibiotics in his first 22 months of life. And he had ear tubes. And despite the ear tubes, he was still getting antibiotics like every 3 or 4 weeks for ear infections. And he would just you would see the pus coming out of his ears because of all these, the infections, right? And, the antibiotics, the nice thing about conventional medicine is that it's good at what it does, which antibiotics help treat each acute infection. The problem was that the antibiotics weren't actually making the child healthier so that he would stop getting the infections. And even the ear tubes hadn't worked to help him stop getting the infections. They helped to make the pressure not build up in his ear so it wasn't as painful, but he would still then just drip this goop down the side of his ear that would come out. And in addition to that, he was language delayed. And so I remember that case was like really vivid in my mind because he responded beautifully to homeopathy and he stopped getting ear infections. That was the first thing that started to improve. And I think he 6 months after I started treating him, got 1 more ear infection. And the family happened to be on vacation at Disneyland. So they went to urgent care and got antibiotics. If he had come to me, we may have tried to treat it naturally with homeopathy. But aside from that, he never got another ear infection. And he went from being language delayed to advanced in language. And, it's funny how things happen. That child is no longer a patient or a client of mine all these years later, but the mom is, I see her on social media and she posts and kind of it dates me a little bit, but that 22-month-old little baby or toddler is now in high school and he plays lacrosse and football and he's like an avid athlete. And, it's so amazing that, I now have been in practice long enough to see these kids grow up and they just become healthy, thriving children. And that's what happened in that case. And that really inspired me to want to work with children, particularly children with chronic health conditions. And eventually what really sparked from that is working with children with developmental delays. Because like children like him who's speech delayed and then caught up, the way my practice kind of grew was, one parent tells another parent and they say, oh, this doctor helped my son, so why don't you go see this doctor? And homeopathy works really, really beautifully for these conditions. And it was just very meaningful to me to see the work that would help these young children because it changes their whole life. And the families, because a lot of times the parents are really stressed out and worried and, concerned about their kids and, if they're delayed in speech or what have you, and then seeing them gradually get better really impacts their life.
Wow, what a beautiful story and beautiful entrance into homeopathy as a patient first, right? And then, it almost was like it was meant to be, I think, with your first patient. So let's delve into autism. This is the area of your utmost expertise. And first of all, because we're talking to general public, and so how a parent can know their child may be on the autism spectrum rather than experiencing some other neurobehavioral disorders, and what are the symptoms that we need to pay attention to?
Good question. So the autism spectrum is a spectrum, and so it's really wide. And we have some kids that we call low functioning, and other kids who are what we call high functioning. There are some common features on the spectrum, but a child who's more low functioning may be more obvious to a parent to go seek help and call their doctor, whereas a child who's more high functioning, the symptoms may be more subtle. So the biggest clues are that they're in autism. Autism literally means to himself or to herself. And so the number one concern in autism is a delay in verbal and nonverbal communication and social connection. So they're in little children, especially toddlers, if they either were developing normally and then regress and get worse, a lot of times what we hear is, they had 10 or 20 or 30 words in their vocabulary, like mama, dada, things like that. And then all of a sudden around 18 months, they just started to lose their words and they stopped talking and started to point at things. And eventually they stopped pointing at things and just seemed kind of lost in their own world in the corner. Okay. So that communication piece is probably the most fundamental part of the autism diagnosis. The other symptoms that may be concerning for a child who is not developing neurotypically are that are consistent with autism are things like repetitive behaviors. And so they could be like spinning in circles or being obsessively, they can have OCD-like tendencies where they become obsessive. And I've seen little kids, they have to line up all their teddy bears in a certain order. And if they don't get out of order, if the parent moves them, they have a massive tantrum. And they may not play with the toys the way they're intended. So they may not use the trucks to play like zoom, 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 like that. But instead they may, just turn the car upside down and spin the wheel or look at it funny or line all the cars up in a certain way, but not play with them like cars. Okay. And so they can have these very rigid fixations and even that can extend to routines. So like the kids will throw massive tantrums if you don't drive the same exact way to school every day. If you take an alternate route, that change in routine can really throw their pattern, or if there's a change in their bedtime routine, or, everything has to be exactly just right. And if it's not, that rigidity and fixation can really be a problem. Another feature with that are repetitive movements. And I touched on that before, but like spinning in circles, flapping hands, things like that. And then another major symptom that we often see is sensory sensitivity. So they may be either hyperactive sensory symptoms, like intensely sensitive to bright lights, noises, like the blender, they cover their ears and run away, or the vacuum turns on and it really, really upsets them, or a loud car. So lights, noises, smells, touch, those kind of things. So they can be either hypersensitive or the opposite, meaning diminished sensitivity. So some kids have extremely high pain tolerance. And I've had kids who are on the autism spectrum that the parents say, yeah, he doesn't feel pain. He'll walk on, I live in Phoenix where it gets really hot in the summer. And like all the kids can't walk on the pool deck because it's too hot and it'll burn their feet. And the child with autism will be walking out there as if they don't even feel the heat and the pain burning their feet. Or they'll walk on rocks and they'll come inside and their feet are bloody and they don't even complain about it. So they could also have hyporeactive sensitivities. But I would say that some of the main concerns to look at, especially, are speech and language communication disorder. They're not making eye contact. They're not speaking. Those kind of things. Those are big red flags to say, call your doctor and get evaluated to see if they may be on the autism spectrum.
That is very helpful. Thank you so much. And so, when we talk about autism and autism spectrum, but why is it so important these days? Because it seems like autism's on the rise. Can you explain more about, what are the challenges in the modern world that maybe are meeting that problem?
Well, it's a major problem. It's an epidemic. When in 1980, there was approximately 1 in 10,000 children had autism. So you're talking about like one kid in every city. I mean, in every town, maybe one kid in every town on the spectrum. And now I think the most recent statistics, I need to look it up because it keeps being adjusted, is like 1 in 36. And when I was in medical school, even, I mean, I started medical school 20 years ago, but like even when I graduated, I think it was like 1 in 150 children. So at 1 in 36, you're talking about an autistic child in every kindergarten classroom. And I know we have friends. My wife has a friend who's a principal of a local elementary school, and they're overflowing with special needs. She was just talking 2 weeks ago about how their school is so overflowing now with children on the autism spectrum that they had to add a second special ed class because there's too many for one classroom, and the needs are kind of like bursting at the seams in the school system, and the medical system is kind of like bursting at the seams. So we have an epidemic there. Now there were some thoughts that, is this a real incidence change? Like, are there really that many newly diagnosed autistic kids, or is it just that we're better at diagnosing it because we see it better now? It's probably a little bit of both. We are better at diagnosing it because we see it more, and there are more therapies now, but it doesn't explain the rise that fast, and the fact that it keeps getting adjusted down, and the fact that we're seeing such a large increase, let's say, in the total stress on the school system, and that. Because if it was just a diagnosis thing, especially when we talk about more severely autistic children that are lower functioning, we're talking about children that can't talk or have very minimal speech. They, may rock in their chair, bang their head against the wall, or smear their feces on the wall. Really more severely disabled children. In 1980, when the numbers were 1 in 10,000, we just didn't see that many. We didn't have the needs for so many special ed classrooms. So the impact on society is growing very rapidly. And we're only at the beginning of that epidemic, because what we're going to see now is in 20 or 30 years from now, when we see 1 in 36 kids now that are in kindergarten rooms that are special ed. And that's very large, because it means every elementary school is now having, multiple special ed classrooms. Well, for the high functioning kids, they'll be able to, have some level of independence in the world. But for the low functioning kids on the spectrum, they will end up being adults who have a lot of needs that will be need to be, as a society, will need to help these families and these kids. And whether those are, I have some young patients I've seen long enough that are now adults that, they go to group homes, or they have alternative work, but there's a big trajectory for this as it goes forward, in terms of the impact on society, and how we're all going to need to help this growing need and this population.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we are dealing with real epidemics, but and obviously there are some conventional methods to address it. But for our viewers who may not have had a lot of exposure to homeopathy in terms of chronic situations, and maybe thinking homeopathy, which often is incorrectly sort of thought as herbal medicine, or supplement, and we buy it at the grocery store and just pop it for like a cold or allergy. But here we come with autism, which is a serious disorder. And how is homeopathy actually equipped to deal with that? Can it actually be helpful? Can it be curative?
Yeah, well, I don't like to use the word curative, because I don't think it's the genuinely right word to use. Maybe more recovered or improved. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, what we can expect with the results we expect with good homeopathic treatment. But I would like to propose that part of why we're seeing this epidemic in homeopathy is that there's a biological underpinning to autism. And I think it's my personal opinion is that autism is wrongly classified as a psychiatric disorder. The current diagnostic criteria for autism are in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is a psychiatric manual, and it's all based on clinical symptoms. But we have more and more evidence mounting that there is inflammation in the brain in many of these children, if not all of them or many of them, a majority. And some of that may be autoimmune in nature, which means that the immune system is confused in attacking cells in the brain. So one very simple example of this that for my patients who are local here in Arizona, I do labs for that for clients who are all over the country or the world. I point them in the right direction so that they can have their pediatrician order it, because it's a little more cutting edge. But we actually do test them for antibodies that we know are affecting brain development. And that's an emerging area of science. So it's very cutting edge. But at the same time, if we find that, there are things that we can do to help lower brain inflammation and stimulate brain healing. And we see improvement symptomatically. And those can be both homeopathic and non-homeopathic. So from the non-homeopathic side, there are things that we could do to adjust the diet. And also certain nutritional supplements to help the brain get certain nutrients that it's deficient in. On the homeopathy side, homeopathy is a really beautiful, safe, gentle, natural medicine that definitely can help more serious concerns. But I would say that if you have something like a chronic health condition, like autism or something that's more chronic in nature, I wouldn't just wing it with a health food store, over-the-counter prescription. You really need to manage it by somebody who's more of an expert in the therapy who can guide you. And one of the reasons is that homeopathy is a completely individualized therapy. So I could have 10 children on the spectrum, but they have totally different symptoms. I could have one child that's sensitive to lights, noises, and smells and bangs their head against the wall and it has violent, angry outbursts and is constipated. And I could have another child on the spectrum that has absence seizures and speech delay and eczema and irritable behaviors and they sweat a lot and their appetite is dysregulated and they have anxiety and OCD. So you see how like those two kids are totally different, and they need, from a homeopathic perspective, I would use totally different medicines to help stimulate their body and brain to heal. The beauty about homeopathy, I mean, you know this, Monica, I'm preaching to the choir, but homeopathy is this beautiful system of medicine called like cures like. And so like cures like, it sounds odd in the beginning, but if you think about it, it's very similar to allergy shots. And so when you get an allergy shot, they're actually giving you a dose of something that you have a bad reaction to or that you're sensitive to. And if they gave you a big dose of it, you would overreact to it. But if they give you a small dose of it, the body develops tolerance. And so it actually is a mild stressor to the body, but it triggers an adaptive healing response from the body. And in fact, allergy shots are the only curative allopathic or conventional medicine treatment for allergies. All the other medicines just kind of like palliate the symptoms temporarily, but allergy shots actually stimulate the immune system to rebalance and not be so hyperactive, but to calm down and develop tolerance to that allergen. Homeopathy is very similar to that. And we use customized individual medicines, but you could use homeopathy in different ways. I'll just show you this. I don't know if you can see my wrist, but I burned myself accidentally this morning on the teapot. I wasn't being careful, and I put my hand over the steam and actually got a burn. And it was this morning at least an inch or an inch and a half in diameter. And the conventional thought would be run the burnt area under cold water, right? And that's not what I did. What I did was I gently put the area over heat. I didn't even take a homeopathic medicine. I just put it over heat and touched something warm to it. And then in the warm shower, put hot water on it. And it stung at first. But then already it's only, been a couple hours. The red area is already down to about half an inch in diameter. And so that burn won't blister. It'll heal beautifully. By tomorrow, I probably won't even be there. But by using heat, even not by an oral medicine, but by using heat to treat my burn, it is the principle like cures like, just like an allergy shot. And so it's stimulating the body. It's saying, okay, enough heat, and then the body kind of adapts and regulates and heals itself. With autism, what we're doing is a little more complicated because the severity of the pathology in many cases is more severe, right? We're dealing with more advanced neurologic changes in the brain and a wider variety of symptoms, right? You know, a lot of these kids have changes all over. They have digestive, either diarrhea or constipation. They may have seizures. They may have behavioral problems. They have sensory sensitivities. They may have skin rashes. And with homeopathy, we are picking an individualized medicine that ideally will stimulate healing for the child across all those planes. And I could tell you some stories, but that's maybe like a kind of a short introduction to homeopathy. Now, let me just say what we expect. Now, there are some research studies, mostly observational studies for autism. There are some more rigorous double-blind studies in homeopathy for ADHD showing very dramatic effects. With autism, most of the research studies are observational studies, but the results are consistent in that what they show is with really good homeopathy, what we tend to see is moving a child from a more severe to a less severe pathology. So we may take a very severe child and make them more in a moderate class, or a moderate class into a mild class, or if they had mild symptoms, many of those kids go on to mainstream or become neurotypical. And the longer I have the opportunity to help some of these kids, the better. So I'll give you a couple of examples. I had a young man who's 18 now, who I had worked with since he was 6, and he probably was a little more high functioning on the spectrum, but definitely had some speech and cognitive delays and some ADHD symptoms, et cetera. And I worked with him for 12 years. He's 18 now, and he's just graduated high school, and he's going to be a firefighter. And so he's obsessed with the fire station and everything else, and he's been volunteering there for years, and it's such a beautiful career for him. I've worked with other kids. Like this one child is coming to mind who was, I treated both her and her brother for about 7 or 8 years, both on the spectrum. The daughter was speech delayed, but she also had absence seizures, eczema, behavior problems. Trying to think of what else. She had daily vaginal discharge. She had a number of health concerns. Within the first month of treatment, she started talking more, and the eczema, her chronic eczema, went away, and she stopped having absence seizures, and she never had absence seizures again after that. Fast forward now, that young girl was like maybe 7 years old when I started treating her. She's 15 and she's in high school. She now speaks 3 languages because her parents are both different cultures, and she speaks English and both languages that are native to each parent. She is partially mainstreamed. So in high school, she has some classes that are special ed and has some extra support there in high school, but she also has several classes that she's actually mainstreamed in high school. So that is definitely possible. Now, her brother was more low functioning, more severe on the autism spectrum. And when he came to me, he had almost no speech, almost completely nonverbal. And the main concerns at the time were a lot of severe violent outbursts. And he, over the course of that time, improved quite a lot. And the violent behaviors went away. The speech actually improved quite a bit. His anxiety and OCD went away. But in terms of like speech and cognition, he basically went from being like in a severe special ed needs class. He was changed to a moderate special needs class. And in that moderate special needs class, he's actually one of the highest performing kids in the class. In other words, like he can sit and do all the assignments they give him. He's not a behavior problem in class. Like all those things, it kind of gradually improve over time as we help the child with his healing. And along with that, he not only can now speak for basic things, but he can also he can use a speech device, and he's much more communicative. So like when he was little and he was really more low functioning, he was kind of like lost in his own world, and it was hard for him to get his needs met. And even within the first few months of starting treatment, he started interacting with mom more in a way that helped him get his needs met. It's like he started to let her know that he had a wet diaper, and eventually he potty trained. So that gave him a huge level of independence. And then, he went on to other areas of independence, but also more social emotional connection. Like now he gets really excited when his dad comes home from work and gives his dad a hug and is very affectionate and loving. And so part of the autism thing, being in their own world, is there's often like a lack of eye contact, speech disconnect, but also there's a social emotional disconnect. And so a lot of times what we find is as these kids start to improve, they show improvement in all these other areas, like social emotional connection. And some of that's good and some is anxiety producing for the parents, because now he's a teenager, and even though he still has his delays, he can communicate with a device, and he can tell his parents that, like he's really into girls. And so that gives his parents, on the one hand, they're happy that he can communicate that and has come such a long way, but it also gives them some trepidation, how they're going to manage. But those are just some examples of like people we've helped. And there's a guy who's 29 who I've worked with for 4 years, who, when he came to see me, he had very severe sensory symptoms. Like we would sit in the dark in my office. It was back in the days when I saw people before COVID, when people actually came in the office in person, and we would sit in the dark and in the dark he would wear sunglasses, almost like those grandma sunglasses that go all the way around. And because he was so sensitive to light, and he was extremely sensitive to noise, and he had he could talk, but it was like the conversation didn't make any sense. I didn't know what the heck he was talking about. And smells really bothered him, and his family was of a culture that used a lot of spice in their cooking, and he would hate his parents because of all the strong smells. And he had years, like 20 years worth of digestive problems, like really intense digestive problems, and a lot of anger problems and OCD and other things. So fast forward, I've been working with him 4 years, and he's just been gradually getting better and better. And now you can have a conversation with him. He can talk to you. It makes very coherent sense. He no longer has sensitivities to like lights, noises, smells. His parents will cook with their strong spices. It doesn't bother him at all. His digestive problems are all completely resolved. He still struggles with, some anger and OCD, which are things that we're continually working on. And even his mom sent me an email this week, and it was funny, because sometimes I get a different report from the mother than the child in this case. But the mom said, I don't like this remedy as much as the one before. The one before was working better. He was less angry, and he seemed more mature and able to explain himself and express his feelings, and also control his anger and his OCD. And so I said, oh, thank you for telling me that. So, we made an adjustment to his treatment plan. But it just goes to show you, one of the beautiful things about the brain is that the brain is what we call neuroplastic. And I alluded to this before, but my personal belief is that there's a biological underpinning to many, if not all, cases of autism, in that there is some inflammation or something going on in the brain that's causing it to not function neurotypically. Okay. And as the brain heals, the beautiful thing about the brain is it actually adapts and can regain function. And so, even, I always say, like with autism in the conventional world, they say early intervention is the best. The younger we can start helping a child, the more plastic their brain is to adapt and heal and change. But even with teens and young adults, like this young man I just told you about, we can see fairly significant improvements with homeopathy, as well as supporting with nutrition and some of the other supportive therapies. But the reason why we can see those improvements is that the brain has the capacity to heal and adapt. And even though as we get older, those neuron routes get more rigid because we lay down, it's like ski slopes. When you got fresh snow, there's no route to go. But the more people go down, the more rigid those ski lines are in the snow and compacted the snow gets. Neurons are like that in the brain. And so with an older teen or young adult, we expect positive changes, but we expect it more slow and gradually. But the beauty is that even with that young man who's now 29, we see how much he's changed in the last 4 years, and the parents have sent me messages thanking me because he doesn't yet have so much independence that he is working a job, but he's gained a lot of independence back in his life. Things that he was dependent on his parents before, now he can walk to a store and buy himself snacks. And that's a big thing. Like, not just the walking to the store, but the interacting, the counting money, the exchange of money. There are a lot of functions in that require higher order cognitive functioning that we take for granted. That is a big step for independence that he can do now. He can walk to the gym, and he likes to exercise at the gym. And probably the most impactful thing that's had an impact on the parents' life is that they now can take like a weekend vacation and leave him home. And he is independent enough now that he can cook for himself and take care of himself for an entire weekend. And the parents get a little reprieve, which, for parents of children with special needs, there's never a break. It's you love your kid to death and you will do anything and you'll go to the moon for your kid and back. But you never get a break. There's no downtime. There's no rest. It's just like a constant hamster wheel, get through one day and get to the next. It's very oftentimes lonely and exhausting, from what I hear from parents, because I've been doing this a long time. And so to have a young adult with autism develop that level of independence, it's not like I'm talking about some radical cure. I don't think that's ethical to talk about. But if we see even these gradual improvements in sensory symptoms and independence and speech, it gives not only him a better quality of life, but it gives the family and the parents a better quality of life. So it changes their whole world.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you so much for those examples. I think that they are fantastic. And it's very important what you bring in, that, it's not necessarily about curing something fully. We cannot make those claims, but improving the overall life of the child and the parents is absolutely possible with homeopathy. But what gets my curiosity now is, say, with conventional medicine, it's mostly focused on suppressing symptoms, right? Versus homeopathy has a different approach. How can those two approaches work together hand in hand? For a parent who is taking their child to a conventional doctor and they're hearing about homeopathy, I mean, can they actually safely reach out to a homeopath? Is that going to interfere? How does that work?
It's a great question. So first of all, there are no medications on the market that actually change the core symptoms of the autism. And the only FDA approved medicines for autism are antipsychotic medicines like risperidone, which come with a lot of side effects. Like I've seen kids gain 60 pounds in 6 months on those drugs. And they're mostly used in children with severe violent behaviors, okay? And the consistent thing I hear from parents is that the child just becomes like a hollow shell and they're numb. And, now they're not violent, but they're, not themselves. And the mainstay of conventional treatment for autism are therapies. So speech therapy, occupational therapy, ABA therapy. There are some also emerging alternative therapies. And the one that I think shows the most promise is something called S2C, spell to communicate, where children learn to spell to communicate either by letterboard or by typing. And this can really open their world if they have a speech delay. And what I would say is that one of the main differences in looking at it is that because the conventional world still is behind in keeping up with the science and thinking that this is just a psychiatric disorder, the treatments are all psychiatric in terms of therapy or psychiatric medications, right? And if the brain is not healthy, those will have limited impact. Now, sometimes the medication can take the edge off enough just to like release a pressure valve and make life easier at home, but it doesn't actually make the child develop more, right? So we can work hand in hand. First of all, with therapy works great with homeopathy. And the thing I've heard over and over and over and over and over again in my career is that parents say, the therapist said all of a sudden he's making faster progress. So I once had like 6 patients from the same occupational therapist, and I didn't know it. And then I got on the phone and I called. I said, I said, thank you so much. Why are you sending me these kids? And she said, well, because I noticed that all the kids that see you are making faster progress. And so it's almost like if the brain is in an inflamed state, there's biologically something going on in the brain that's unhealthy. You could do therapy till the cows come home, and it's like banging your head against the wall. And it's like the homeopathy just goes in and like unlocks a locked door and it opens things up, because if the brain then becomes healthy, what happens is that the therapies start working better. Because in every health condition, there's 2 parts of the equation. There's nature and nurture. So nature is like your genetics, your immune system, all those things. But nurture are all the things you do in the environment to nurture, whether it's therapy or good food or what have you. And there's almost always some sort of balance in that equation. And if you wanted to be, let's say you wanted to be good at the piano, you may have a good ear for hearing music, but if you don't have a teacher and if you don't actually practice the piano, you're not going to get any good at it. So what we do with homeopathy is work on the nature side of the equation to unlock, kind of what's stuck in the brain, to help the healing and inflammation in the brain so that the brain actually functions better. And then the therapies start working even better. Now, if a child comes to be on medication, like an anti-anxiety medicine or an antipsychotic medication, I never change the medicine. That's up to working with the psychiatrist to do. But what we do is we keep that stable, and if the medication's working to take the edge off, great. And what we do then is gradually get the child better. And as the child gets better and better and better, then they can gradually wean off the medicine. And I've seen that many times as well. So there's no harm. The homeopathy is extremely safe and gentle natural medicine. It won't interfere at all with the medication if they're on conventional drugs, so they can work synergistically. But ideally, because what we're working for is resolution of the symptoms, not just kind of keeping them at bay. As the child gets healthier, they can wean off that. And, like seizures are a good example. I would never take a child off seizure medication because it's dangerous. And when they come off seizure medicine, they can actually have a rebound increase of seizures. So that has to be very carefully done with the help of the neurologist. But I have had many cases over my career where, as the child's gotten healthier with homeopathy, they were still having breakthrough seizures on their seizure medicine. Their seizures get better and become less and go away. And then we've had times where, once the child's stable for a year or 2 years or whatever it is that the neurologist deems as the safe timeline, then we work with the neurologist to safely wean those medicines. And I've seen that happen in many children. So it's definitely possible, but we do it very, very slowly and very carefully.
Yes, that's great. And I think also it's very important to know that, a professional homeopath will never ask a parent to take the child off the medications like so, because, obviously it is not safe. So But you mentioned a little bit about lifestyle, and I think that's also another part of it when you talk about, healing the brain biology with homeopathy. But then a very important thing is nutrition and lifestyle. Are there any advice, since you are also a naturopath, obviously? Can you tell more about that and how important that is?
It's like the foundation of the house, like the building blocks of our brain and our bodies are made by the food we put in our bodies and the sleep we get at night. And by the way, many kids on the autism spectrum have dysregulated sleep, and the homeopathy helps correct that. But if the building blocks are poor, and we're having just simple example like essential fatty acid ratios, so you think of like fish oils, but if the oils and the fats in our body are 20-to-1 inflammatory, and they should be 1-to-1 or 4-to-1, there's a big imbalance, and the immune system goes haywire and it can't correct it. And so we very often use nutrition, and sometimes it's targeted by the labs. We find out, something on the labs that shows that there's a nutrient deficiency or an autoimmune process, and then we correct that. There are lots of basic foundational nutritional things we can do to clean up a child's diet to make it healthier, so that they don't, so it helps their behavior and their mood, but and brain, just basic brain development. But the way I like to think about it, if we could compare it to an analogy like a female menstrual cycle. If, let's say, you had a woman who was anemic because she has really, really heavy cycles and she bleeds too heavily, you could just give the woman iron for the iron deficiency, and she might not feel as tired. But it's kind of like trying to clean up the mess on the floor while the sink is overflowing, and not addressing the fact that you just have to turn off the sink. So what we do with the homeopathy is we help heal from the inside to turn off the sink, so that ultimately the actual problem or the health concerns internally resolve, so that long-term they're not as dependent on those nutrients. So if we identify that there's a significant nutrient deficiency that's important in brain function, we may supplement that, just like an iron deficient anemic woman might need iron if they're bleeding too heavily. But just like in the woman, if we didn't help correct her menstrual cycle so that she stops the heavy bleeding, we wouldn't actually be solving the problem. You can take an apple off an apple tree and it won't stop the tree from growing more apples. So we have to actually, heal. In the woman's case, we would have to heal the menstrual cycle so she's not bleeding so heavily. And in the child's case, we have to heal the underlying, brain dysfunction or inflammation in the brain, so that long-term those nutrients are not necessarily needed, but they are like the foundation of the house.
Okay. Yes. Wonderful. I mean, it's beautiful how you kind of build this holistic picture where there's homeopathy, nutrition, and also, therapy that is important. And then the child is really taken care of and can progress and can start to thrive, which is an incredibly encouraging picture, and versus, thinking of, I think often we think of autism as almost like a life sentence where nothing can actually get better. And it's not true, because there are other solutions such as homeopathy. So thank you so much for sharing all that. And, as sort of closing our interview, how would you actually encourage parents who may be listening to reach out to a homeopath? And is there something that they should be looking for in terms of choosing the right practitioner? Any questions that they should be able to ask?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's it's a little bit of buyer beware, because there's a lot out there that people that call themselves natural medicine or call themselves homeopaths. Some people are doing what we call like by the book Hahnemannian classical homeopathy, and some people that are doing lots of things that they call homeopathy but aren't really homeopathy. So it's a little bit, unfortunately, up to the consumer to find a good homeopath. A couple of resources for you. There is a good book by a woman, Amy Lansky, who's a PhD, and her son improved dramatically with homeopathic treatment. She wrote a book called Impossible Cure, and her website also points to practitioners who are experienced with treating autism. There's another great book by a guy, Timothy Dooley, who medical doctor and naturopathic doctor. Is called Beyond Flat Earth Medicine. And the book is beyondflatearth.com. And it's a really easy, short read. And you could, read it in an afternoon. But the book is available free for the first edition online. And the second edition you can buy for like 10 or 11 bucks online. But that's a really good introduction to homeopathy, so you know what real homeopathy is. Some other resources, the HANP, the Homeopathic Academy of Naturopathic Physicians, people who go on to get their specialty designation, like I have, have a designation called DHANP. And so that website will have a listing of practitioners. So you know that those practitioners have gone on to get extra expertise and training. But most important, I would say, is you want to look for, a practitioner who's, number one, well-trained in both homeopathy, but also has experience in neurodevelopmental disorders, because, you could be a really good homeopath but not have the experience in the conditions. The more experience you are with the conditions, the more dramatic your results will be, because you have a lot more familiarity with those children's and the condition, that kind of thing. So, if you want to work with me, my website is droskin.com, droskin.com. I also have an online Facebook group called Homeopathy for Autism. And I believe, if I have this right, is homeopathy the number 4 and then autism. But you can search for it on Facebook. If you just type in homeopathy for autism and you spell it all out, you'll probably find the group there. And that is a free group. I have a whole series of lectures on there. There's short videos, like 2 to 5 minute videos that basically are educational to teach you about homeopathy, how to find a good practitioner, what to look for, what are good results with homeopathy, so I have an entire educational course on there that's free in the Facebook group. So that's a really good place to start, because I'm just giving away all that free education to help you as a consumer so that you can find a good practitioner.
Beautiful. Yes, I put all the information in the chat here, so it's going to stay with the YouTube recording for anybody who wants to check it out. Very much encourage you, and especially there's so many free resources, and that education before you even reach out to a practitioner is extremely important, because we want to work with people who are really have the highest qualifications and highest experience in this very important, situation. So beautiful. Well, I mean, this was so rich in information that what you provided today, Dr. Oskin. Is there anything that you would like to conclude with, to leave our audience with, that you think will be helpful?
Well, I will say that I haven't been able to help every case in my career, but there are many, many children that we have helped change the trajectory of their life and help them and their families. And I never give up hope. And as a parent, I hope you hear that message, that there is always hope for a better quality of life, and that symptoms can become more manageable, that independence can be more than it is now, and that the brain has this amazing capacity to be neuroplastic and to heal. And if you hear nothing else from me, it's that there's always hope.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this message. It's so encouraging, and thank you so much for sharing all the wealth of your information and your wisdom, your experience, and the examples that you gave us. And so thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. If you have questions, first of all, please reach out. You can reach out to Dr. Oskin, I believe. Please check out those resources that he provided. They are all in the chat here on comments. And also you can reach out to us as well if you have any questions. I would like some more information, and we're all here for you. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Oskin. It was a true pleasure and to have you on the show today. And I appreciate everybody, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.